Everyone treats self-doubt like a mystery, like the real issue is that you don't know yourself, that somewhere in there is a stranger you haven't met yet. I don't buy it. In a lot of cases, the problem was never that you didn't know. It's that you knew and you got talked out of believing it. You've had the moment. Something in you said this isn't right, or I can't keep doing this, or I am exactly this kind of person, long before anyone else agreed with you. Maybe long before you agreed with yourself out loud. So here's what we're doing. 4 different versions of that experience. 4 patterns of being right about yourself before the evidence caught up with you. And for each one, a small, specific tool you can use the next time it happens. Not to become someone new. You don't need reinventing, just to trust the read you already had. Let's start somewhere that has nothing to do with self-perception on the surface, and everything to do with it underneath. In 1999, a financial analyst looked at the performance numbers of one of the most respected investment managers on Wall Street and noticed something that didn't add up. The returns were too smooth, almost no losing months, in a market that has losing months by definition. He ran the math and concluded within minutes that it was mathematically impossible for the numbers to be real. He wasn't believed. He brought his analysis to regulators. Not once, but repeatedly, over the better part of a decade, laying out the red flags in detail each time. Each time, it was set aside. It took until the end of 2008 for the fund to collapse on its own, revealing a fraud worth an estimated $65 billion, confirming almost line for line what he'd said 9 years earlier. He wasn't wrong, he was early. And for 9 years, early and wrong looked exactly the same from the outside. That's the shape of it. That's what it feels like to carry an accurate read on something, including yourself, before the world has caught up enough to confirm it. You're not confused. You're just holding evidence nobody else has processed yet. There's a name for what happens the moment the outside world finally catches up to what you already knew. Researchers who study self-perception have found something that sounds backwards at first. People don't actually relax the most when they're told good things about themselves. They relax when they're seen accurately, even when the accurate read isn't flattering. Being confirmed feels different from being praised. It feels like coherence, like the inside and the outside finally match. There's an older idea underneath that one from the therapist Carl Rogers, who described people as operating from one of 2 centers of judgment. An external one, where you check whether you're okay by scanning other people's reactions, or an internal one, where you check against what you actually feel and know and let that carry weight on its own. Most of us don't get to choose which one we grew up using. But the moment we're describing tonight, the moment you realize you were right about yourself the whole time, is really the moment the internal center gets outside proof. I'll call it the verification point, not a moment of change. A moment where the record finally matches what you'd been quietly keeping the whole time. There are a few different shapes this takes. Let's go through them. The first one is about a trait, something about how you are, not what you did. You called it early, sometimes years early. You needed more recovery time than everyone around you. You noticed things other people missed and got exhausted by things other people didn't even register. And somewhere along the way, someone gave that a less generous name. Too sensitive, too much, overthinking it, and you adjusted. Not because you agreed, but because disagreeing out loud cost more than quietly rearranging your life around what you already knew to be true. Here's the sign. This is what's happening. You feel calmer around people who describe you accurately, even when the description isn't kind, than around people who praise a version of you that doesn't exist. That's not low self-esteem. That's your system recognizing accuracy when it finally shows up. The tool here is small. I call it the baseline check. Take the trait someone once told you was a flaw, the sensitivity, the need for space, the caution, and for 1 week, just track it. Not whether it's likable, whether it's costing you or protecting you. Write down what it actually does in real situations without editing for how it sounds. Most people are stunned by how one-sided the evidence turns out to be. That's the read on who you are. There's a second kind of read, and it gets punished even harder. The read on how much you can actually carry. This one shows up as a prediction. You said, "I need to stop," before it looked justified on paper. Output was still fine. Nobody else could see a problem yet, but something in you had already run the math on where this was headed, and it wasn't subtle to you, even if it was invisible to everyone watching from outside. You were probably told you were being dramatic, or giving up too soon, or that everyone feels like that sometimes. And maybe you pushed through anyway, because the evidence you had was internal, and internal evidence doesn't hold up well in an argument. Here's the tell: the exhaustion showed up in your body, sleep, appetite, patience, before it ever showed up in anything measurable. That gap between what you felt and what anyone could point to is exactly where this pattern lives. The tool is a single question, and I call it the capacity question. Instead of asking, "Should I push through this?" ask, "What did I predict would happen last time I ignored this feeling? And was I right?" You're not asking whether you're capable. You're checking your own track record. Most people, once they actually look, find out they've been a far better predictor of their own limits than anyone gave them credit for. So, 2 reads down: reading who you are, reading what you can carry. Both of those are about your relationship with yourself. The next 2 are scarier because they're about reading the world and then turning that same lens back on, where all of this started. The third pattern is about people, and this one has actual research behind it that might surprise you. There's a well-documented finding in psychology that strangers shown a completely silent video clip of someone teaching, sometimes as short as 10 seconds, can rate that person's effectiveness with striking accuracy, closely matching evaluations gathered from an entire semester of contact. 10 seconds with no sound held up against months of lived experience. That's not a fluke. It's evidence that quick, wordless reads of people carry more real information than we're taught to trust. Which means the read you had on someone in the first 10 minutes, the one you talked yourself out of because you had no proof, probably wasn't noise, it was data. You just didn't let yourself keep it. The sign is familiar. The discomfort arrives before the explanation does. You feel it in a meeting, at a dinner, in the first exchange with someone new. And only weeks later does an event happen that explains what you felt. You kept the read to yourself at the time because saying something's off with nothing to point to sounds paranoid out loud. So you filed it under overthinking instead of information. The tool is the 10-second read. The moment you get a first impression, before you talk yourself out of it, write it down, 1 line, unedited, not what you think you should feel, what you actually felt. Then leave it alone and check it later against what actually happens. That's the whole mechanic, by the way. Noticing a read in the moment and having somewhere to put it so you can check it against reality later instead of losing it to hindsight. That's most of what Daily Clarity Doors is built to do. You log the read the moment you have it, rate how sure you were on the decision scale, and the weekly review shows you in your own past entries how often your first instinct turned out to be the accurate one. Not a productivity app, a record of how right you've actually been, so the next time you doubt a read, you're arguing with your own evidence instead of your anxiety. It's linked below if you want to start keeping that record instead of losing it to memory. There's one more read left, and it's the one most people spend the longest avoiding. This one isn't about a trait or a limit or another person. It's about you from further back than any of the others, from before you had language for any of this. You knew your own pace before anyone gave you permission to have one. You knew when a room was too loud, a schedule was too full, a version of yourself being asked for wasn't really you. And you knew it early, in a way that had no evidence behind it yet. Only a feeling that turned out later to be correct almost every time. Nobody verified it back then. There was no data, no research, no framework. Just a read, held alone, for a long time without anyone checking it against anything. And if you're the kind of person watching a video like this one, someone who slows down, checks the evidence, doesn't trust a feeling until it's earned it, there's a decent chance that Reed was the most disciplined thing about you. Not stubbornness, not sensitivity for its own sake. An accurate account kept quietly for years before anyone else was in a position to confirm it. That's the fourth verification point, and it's usually the quietest one because there's no outside record to point to. Just you recognizing that the read was right on your own. So, early, not wrong, that's the whole shape of it. Whether it's a 9-year gap between a warning and a collapse, or a 10-second read you dismissed, or a limit you named before your body proved it, or the earliest version of yourself you had no proof for yet. The pattern repeats. You weren't confused. You were holding evidence before anyone else was ready to look at it. If one of these landed, tell me which one in the comments. The trait, the capacity, the person, or the version of yourself from further back than any of it. I read everyone, and it tells me exactly which pattern to go deeper on next. Because there's a real question sitting right underneath everything we just covered, and it's the uncomfortable one. How do you actually tell the difference between trusting a read that's earned it, and just refusing to update when you're wrong? That's next.